Hi, I'm Laura.
Hey, I'm Stefan, and you're listening to Attributed, a podcast library by Dream Data.
The purpose of it is to store and share all the knowledge that we have gathered across Dream Data employees through our LinkedIn Lives, podcasts, and webinars.
The typical topics you'll find here can be stuff like marketing,
Sales,
B2B ads,
operations.
social selling, maybe.
Hello and welcome everybody to today's live session brought to you by us here at Dream Data. I'm very excited today because today we actually have a woman on our live show today who have helped shape how we do product marketing at Dream Data without her knowing it. But she has written a fantastic book, which I deemed one of the two Bibles of product marketing for software companies. And yeah, Martina, I'm just super happy that you have said yes to share some of your knowledge about everything you've seen in the product management and product marketing and investor and marketing role throughout your career. So thank you so much for taking the time to speak with me and us here today.
Stefan, thank you so much for having me, and it's a joy to be here.
You have such an extensive CV, Martina. So I would probably leave it to you kind of just to do the 1-2 minute fly in.
Yeah, the flyover pass of my builds to where I am.
Yeah.
So I'd say the first stage for me as an operator inside of companies, leading product management, product marketing teams. I started my career at Microsoft as a product manager for Word, watched the transition to Office. So, what is it like to build a suite and change and define a category? Then the internet happened, and I said, I got to be a part of that. So, left Microsoft to go to Netscape, which was one of the foundational companies that enabled the internet era. And that basically introduced me to Silicon Valley and the crazy creative chaos that defines Silicon Valley. And then left Netscape to join Ben Horowitz and Mark Andreessen with their next endeavor, which was the first internet services as a provider company. Loud Cloud went from zero to IPO in 2.5 years. And that was a crazy, crazy ride. And then took a decade really to focus on other things and teaching and consulting and being on advisory boards and building my teaching practice, which is where I worked with much more range of companies. And early stage companies that IPO'd, again, they're just really trying to understand how does product marketing show up in all these different scenarios, as well as product management, because really the edges and definitions of that change and vary by company. And then I've spent the last decade at Costa Noa Ventures. We are an early stage investor in seed and Series A, and we invest in really heavy B2B brainiac categories like data and AI infrastructure and cybersecurity and defense and fintech. And so it's been really interesting to work with founders at those earliest stages when product marketing is everything that is shaping and determining the success and whether or not people care about their product. So that's how I got here. And in there, I wrote a book, and I've also been teaching at UC Berkeley for 14 years.
That's a fantastic career you've had so far, Martina. It's so impressive. Maybe just because you already mentioned it now, kind of how does what you would perceive to be product marketing look like back at Netscape when you kind of had to go on the market there compared to what
It's like now. The biggest change from the start of my career to what it is now is you would you'd spend a ton of time polishing and honing every word and figuring everything out, because once you did it, you were stuck with it. It was on boxes, it was in paper, it was produced in books. And so it would have a shelf life of a year to 2 years, because that's what software cycles were. So you really spent a lot of time and energy getting it as close to right up front. And so it took a formula, because that's what made everyone feel safe making these multi-year bets, because you'd be stuck with whatever you chose for that long. And that's where we are not there at all anymore. And I think that's the delight and amazement and opportunity of what we have now, which is I can make it. I'm working with a company right this minute where we're like, we got to change how we show up in the world. And by the end of this week, we're going to have a new homepage, new messaging. It's going to flow through everything. That speed was not possible, nor was it encouraged back then. But now it's a market necessity, because markets at this moment are changing so quickly. And so that's the biggest change, is the speed and velocity at which product happens and markets are changing.
that's so interesting to hear where assume there was a lot of room for perfectionism back then, where if every comma has to be exactly right.
Yeah.
Can't help thinking about, like, if you go along the kind of marketing science, when you say like companies nowadays they change so fast, and I think there's like a concept of mental availability or whatever you like the science marketing scientists would call it, where it's kind of you need to be consistent. You need to mention the same things over and over again because you can only occupy one or two
Yes.
in the brain. How does that uh,
How does that jive with that? Yeah, so great question.
get
And
out?
the to me, it's the evolution to the position in which you feel comfortable you can hold is much more dynamic. You do still have to hold onto a position for years for it to be recognized and understood by your customers and by the market. But the process of getting there can be very dynamic and messy. And I encourage that mess because you really can't discover and lean in like, oh, this is really where we're getting traction. We used to have to guess based on market research and all these other things. Now you plant it in reality, you get the market to react, you iterate until you find and discover, this is the position we can hold. This is the one that is winning in the market. And you look at all the signals. Is this working in sales? Is this working in our funnel? Is this working in our discoverability or this company that I mentioned to you? We're just looking at bounce rates. We're trying to get the foundational front door like, hey,
Hmm.
instead of 6 out of 10 people exiting, let's at least get it to less than half so that more people stay than leave. And that's the kind of signal we're looking for before we hold the position at rest. And once you have that, then you do want to hold. But it's hard. It's hard. I think it's much harder to find that position than it used to be because there's so much competition.
It's so interesting whether what I think like as a founder, you only get to do a couple, or you don't get to see as many positioning moves inside your company as you have seen as an investor.
Yeah.
And I think it's kind of it's very hard when you're in it to see, okay, or it's I think the nuances are not super clear always that okay, we changed position here and it was a good decision, or it's hard sometimes to validate whatever you see.
Yeah. And I'll say something that you're bringing up that's important is where you are as a startup versus if you're a mature company is really different. Mature companies reposition and hold because they have market mass. They are known as an entity. But there you have to earn your way into that position where you can do that. And it's that process of earning that market awareness that takes a while. And there are different moments where you might have certain audiences that are more important than others. So most of the time, your customer might be your important audience. But let's say you're going through a fundraising cycle. You and I were talking about this before we started about the grand AI washing. But an investor is going to look at that website and say, okay, are they part of the current AI native era? If I glance at them, do they look interesting enough to be worth my time? Because that's all I want to be investing in right now. And so you might, for a period of time, say, well, right now I'm going through a fundraise cycle and I have to show up looking a certain way to prospective investors. And right now, that's my more important audience than customers. So this is the dynamic game that you couldn't play before. And certainly a mature company doesn't have to play that. But younger companies that are still trying to establish themselves or find their market foothold, they might have to be that dynamic.
That's so interesting, and it's a discussion we've had so many times. Like when we say positioning, are we positioning for the market, or are we positioning for investors that we want to kind of sway, even though if it's cheating or like accounting the roadmap 12 months ahead? But what I'm hearing you saying is, in the short term, what is the most important audience for the messaging you want to get out?
It's what's the most important positioning or messaging for our business. And there might come a moment where like right now for our business, the most important thing is that we're able to get this next round closed. Hopefully at some point you as a like the job of an early stage startup is to escape that. So that really all that matters are their customers and how they're positioned for our customers. And at a certain point you get past that. And that's the only thing you're evaluated on. It's just how are you doing in the market? So that the early stage, there's a little bit more it's way more dynamic in the earliest stages. Then once you have, once you cross the 5 to $10 million threshold, that's when it's all about how you show up in the market. It's all about how, what your average contract value is, what your close rates are. It's all about your business metrics at that point. And so then your messaging is all about your customers and your market exclusively. But again, it depends on where you are at what stage.
Yeah, I think this is when I reflect about our own journey. Before we understood that there's this distinction that investor positioning and then market positioning. And market positioning is the pains of your buyers right now, how you solve them, how your product looks. And then there's investor positioning, which is most likely the forward looking into a bigger, more exciting market than what your technology grasps today, I guess.
Yes. And that I would say what you just described is the biggest mistake I see because we invest in early stages where everyone's like, I had to look as big and I had to have this grand future that people wanted to invest in. And then they try and sell that future to customers and they're like, what are you talking about? What can you do for me right now? That is the only thing I care about. You have to earn the right to get to deliver your future vision. What people care about is what are you going to do for me right at this moment? And why are you worth my time? Why are you worth doesn't if you're anywhere in the B2B space, you're displacing a behavior. You're displacing something that is comfortable. You're displacing an existing technology or way of getting things done that feels comfortable. And then inertia is hard to overcome. So you have to be not incrementally better. You have to be massively better for them even to consider it.
That's really good, Martina. So, at least for us in the European side, I think positioning is like still somewhat a new discipline to think about. If you are to kind of if you were to kind of help diagnose or for people to self-diagnose if they have a positioning problem, what and then afterwards we can then talk about what does the opposite look like. But what are the typical things companies will experience if there's like positioning problem challenges, if you want?
Yeah, I would say the first tell that you might have a messaging or positioning problem is in your customer conversations. And because if you've already earned the right to have a conversation, if people aren't engaging in the next step, then there's something wrong in your value proposition and how you're saying it. And it's I can't say how much of it is the product, how much of it is how it's positioned, but it's in some combination of those things. But that's the first tell that it's not good enough. And I think what a lot of people do is they say, oh, if I have 2 out of every 10 conversations go pretty well, that's pretty good. I would say in those early days when a lot of who discovers you is a warm handoff in some way, they have some awareness of you,
Yeah.
it should be higher than that. And so you want like a good, like a fairly decent, like, okay, we don't have a messaging or positioning problem is you have 40, 50, 60, 70% conversion rate from first conversation to at least the next one. That
Mhm.
means, okay, what you have, what you and I are talking about is valuable enough that I want to have the next conversation. I'll probably bring more people in. And I'd say work that hard to make it that valuable and don't settle for good enough.
Yeah, cool. And then if you think back about some of the examples where you've seen like positioning really hit, what are the light bulbs that go on for companies at those moments?
What does that look like and how does it show up?
Yeah,
Yeah, well, I'd say like that's the, to me, that then is the biggest tell, which is when they're engaging in conversation. Well, certainly at a basic level, you can look at your website and say, like, well, what are my exit rates? What's my time on site? How are they engaging? Because that gives you just at a foundational level who's coming and have we positioned ourselves well enough that they care enough to stay. So I think your website is always the early and easy tell. By the way, are you hearing uh, sounds?
I hear your background.
Okay, so sorry. So your website stats are a very good place to look for is our foundational value proposition and what we are offering compelling. So I'd look there, then I'd look inside of the conversations, and that's also the indication of where you've hit it. So let's say you do a website revision, your bounce rates need to go down, your click-through needs to go up, just again, the real basics. And that's when you know you're at least getting closer. So those are the signs that you look for.
That's really good input, Martina. I actually don't hear positioning experts talk about those like the very leading metrics that it should give you kind of immediate feedback that time on the site drops 30 seconds or like with 50%.
Yeah.
Maybe you're writing something that people don't get at all,
Yeah.
or the performance marketer is buying traffic that doesn't fit the messaging.
Right. I once worked with a company that they basically had messaging, sort of the hero messaging and the subhead, and they had a selection by the CEO who loved how he wanted to articulate it. a recommendation by the head of sales, and then something created by the marketing team, and they were all pretty different. And the one recommended by the head of sales, he's like, look, this is just what I say to our customers. I don't know if it's any good, but this is how I say it. That one outperformed the one by the CEO by over 1,000%. And so at the end of a week, and the marketing team one did okay, but it wasn't as good as the sales one. They're like, we're going with the head of sales version of this. And the CEO, who is absolutely convinced that his way of articulating it was the best, never said it. It was never said it the same way again. He just said like, well, I'll clearly adopt how the head of sales is talking about this. But I think part of what happens is when we are inside our companies, we can fall in love with the way that we like to talk about it. And it's not necessarily the way the world either sees us or can comprehend what we mean. There's this real big gap that we often don't realize needs to be closed. And often someone in sales, because they have to engage with a person in a live conversation, they get that human feedback loop. They're getting really close to how a normal human would articulate value in a way that's easily and quickly understood. And so that's where you can discover a lot of gems, is really strong salespeople are going to discover a lot of the more human ways of articulating value.
Yeah, that's such a great point. I think sometimes we've realized that we've developed some kind of term that in the office everybody gets what is it that we're talking about when we mention this, or this feature will hold all these things for us. But like that doesn't necessarily guarantee that somebody outside your company will perceive the same things. What is kind of the so obviously there's the like listening to the sales calls or talking with the sales team. Are there any other kinds of like tests or research that we from like a product marketing perspective can do to validate that we're on the right path?
Yeah. Well, that is my single favorite way to discover the landscape of things that I wanna test, is listening to calls, and what's, again, a great thing about now is you used to have to ride along with salespeople to do all this stuff, and now it's like, I can just listen to 25 calls, or I can pass the call. And here's the key: if you summarize through AI, it summarizes the trends, and it doesn't give you this hyper specific language. It doesn't identify interesting pauses or posturing or a moment of wonder. And so you do want to summarize the big trends, but you also have to listen to the gory details of some of these conversations to understand moments, understand what's not being said.
Or
This
when
is the kind of,
smiling or
yeah, or you observe a pattern. So this one company where I basically did that, I was listening to gong calls, and I realized, like, if all I was listening for was the problems they were articulating and how the salespeople were responding, there certain trends would have come up, and the messaging all was within that. But it occurred to me as I was listening to the pattern that the very first thing they wanted to talk about was how they were doing things today, and they wanted to feel understood, not in the like, "Hey, let me, challenge your sales mode, keep asking questions." It was acknowledge that you understand my world. And so the first thing we did in the revised version of the messaging was we had this moment where we took a breath and said, "We understand. This is the stuff that you're dealing with." So it didn't come across as we're coming in cold, we're coming in hot with this really amazing stuff that we know solves all these problems that you have. It's acknowledging, we know, we see these problems and we acknowledge that it comes from customers. It's not like academically, here are problems that the industry is facing. It's, we've spoken to 100 of our customers, and these are the problems that they have told us they are still finding challenging. And so we worked to solve these problems. That engages an audience in a very different mindset. And I would not have discovered that had I not listened to those calls versus just summarizing what are the problems that they're experiencing. If that makes sense. So anyway, I think that's an enormously powerful tool. And then also on the net positive for AI, I actually put things through audience tests. I'll have it proxy the audience. I'll field it. I'll feed it the personas and say this through the persona of Stefan. Read what do you take away from this messaging? Would it be compelling enough for you to tell a colleague? How would you evaluate this? And it just kind of has to pass the basic AI sniff test. And most of the time, like the first pass at at messaging doesn't. And then you can just use it as a partner saying, what would it take for you to want to actually recommend or, recommend this to a colleague or find it interesting enough not to just put it in the consideration set, but actually want to take a next step with this company. And it gets extremely specific in its recommendations when you feed it a persona through which to analyze it. And then you can say, well, do I need to be that specific? Is that important? Am I over indexing my messaging towards one
Mm.
specific persona, or is that actually helpful
Yeah,
because it clarifies for my audience?
that's so interesting, Martina. We're going through. I think we'll go into a loop of doing like a yearly positioning catch up where we look at the market, the customers, our own product, and the outcome of that is that we then need to develop messaging. So once that messaging is kind of done, I'll be sure to make sure that the team also runs it through. Imagine you're a B2B marketer at a 2,000 people SaaS company and read this and then like tell me if you get it or what's the things that I'm missing. That's a really good point. Another thing like I was just thinking about when you talked about the AI research on calls, we typically force it to also mention exact quotes. So you don't get it into kind of where it just synthesizes what was kind of the overall meaning, but you have to tell us what quote made you write these things that which makes it a little bit more tangible. But I really love, Martina, I hadn't considered that the calls tells us kind of the what is it you say? Some percentage of communication are the words you say, and the other.
Yeah, it's the white space of what's not said, and I do think, like, we're talking about AI, and I love that most of the time, I'd say AI, at least when I'm prompting it, it tends to do great jobs of doing pull quotes that are indicative of that, which is great, and then you can go down and look deeper. But I think part of what's happening with AI as a tool is AI moves everything towards this mushy middle where things start to sound either the same or overly precise in a way that just is not quite right. I just posted about this last week because
Yeah.
I taught my class at Berkeley and I was like, you have to lean into AI. That's just the era in which we are. And
Mm.
you would get all this false precision around how they would articulate terms like ambient presence. I'm like, whoever says that, what the hell does that mean? And but AI is great with coming up with these hyper precise ways of articulating something, and you'll look at it and go like, oh, that's so good. That's so exactly what we mean.
Yeah.
But it's not a way of expressing an idea that a human can connect to. So I think we're at this moment simultaneously where we use it as a tool and we have to put it through the human stress test of, does this pass human muster? Would I actually say this?
Yeah.
Would someone remember or articulate it this way? And I think that now is the challenge for us as product marketers is we can get all of this material much faster and we can get to good much faster, but
Yeah.
getting it to that level of great and connective and human, that's hard. It's always been hard, and that work definitely has not gone away.
Yeah, I think that's what is like anybody can do mediocre copywriting now, and probably also somewhat good, but there's still some merit for the humans being able to write something in the way that you would say it to another person that hopefully still exists.
Yeah, for sure.
I just realized that so far I've kind of pushed you to talk about positioning, but do you actually regard that as the same work as product marketing work, or are they like parts of each other or the same thing, or are they different disciplines? How do you kind of? I just want to make sure that.
Yeah, like what
Yeah,
that is one of the most important parts of product marketing, but I do see the role of the product marketer as being more than that, and that's why I articulate the four fundamentals in my book.
yeah,
And the first one is that ambassadorship, which is always representing the market and the customer reality in the side and outside. So taking it in to the product teams, taking the sales reality into the product teams and vice versa. So that ambassadorship is really the foundation because you can't do any of this work without that depth of knowledge where you could decide this is or isn't a good way of articulating this for a human that I am targeting. So you have to have that market and customer foundation to be effective in product marketing. So that's not thing one. Thing two is really the strategy, which is I was just thinking about that this morning. There's a company within our portfolio that I'm working with, and they're targeting auditors inside of finance organizations. And a company I worked with years ago, Workiva, where they work with SEC professionals, they built up to their first 50 million in revenue, just hyper targeting and building. These days, we might call it a community of SEC professionals where they could get their financial credits, their training credits, their annual credits. So it wasn't just, hey, here's a place to find out. It was I need these credits anyway. I might as well go to a place that are with people like me. And they would credit their first 50 million primarily with that as what got them there quickly. So that's strategy. That's figuring out, because you can do everything and be spread peanut butter thin, or you can pick the things that are at this moment in time most strategically important for where we need to get to next. And it's where we started the call, which is the product marketer needs to know what's right for the business. Not their job is not just to promote the product and get it out into the market, but they have to align that with where their business needs to go. And because sometimes it might be, let's say you're at a much more mature company, the right thing for the business is not to take the business that is the cash cow and is the majority of revenue, but it's to really try and push and inflect around a brand new product line that is not well known, that the company doesn't have positioning for. And so what's the strategy? You can't just ride the coattails of where the company has been. So the product marketer needs to find and discover that go-to-market strategy for the product so that it can achieve its intended business goals. So that's the strategy component. Then comes the storytelling. That's for the positioning and messaging. That's bread and butter, and every product marketer knows that. But it needs to be connected to those other things, because the strategy determines whether or not positioning isn't objectively good or bad. It is compared to an objective. And so that's why that strategy is so important. And then the last is just evangelism. Not that you are the primary evangelist, but that you are enabling it. So in a B2B organization, the sales team are your primary evangelists. But increasingly, we're in this world of influencers. It can be analysts, but it really is now digital influencers have enormous impact. And how do you bring them into the fold? How does that influence? Are you doing it through communities? Are you doing it through a Slack channel? Are you doing it through Discord? Are you doing it on GitHub? Depends on your market and where your market, what waters they swim in. And that shapes where you might find this evangelistic core. And it's essential in modern markets. So those are the four fundamentals that surround product marketing.
It's such a hard job.
It is.
All the way over to the product department, over the marketing department, over to the sales department, C-level alignment, and you need kind of to be the glue in the middle.
You're this big glue, yes. And I'll say this is the most elite version of product marketing. This is product marketing at its best and its most powerful and its most impactful. And it's not often practiced that way. It is often relegated to do the positioning and messaging and enable sales. So just really the tail end.
Mm.
And somebody else might be crafting the strategy in which you are executing. And that is more common in more mature organizations that have a lot more mass.
Yeah.
So not all of that is necessarily your remit, again, depending on the size, scale, and structure of your organization.
So how does one one that gets or thinks product marketing is important to, how do you elevate it to that position in a company where everybody acknowledges that this is super important?
I don't think there's a way to force this other than to do it. Like, you can't say product marketing should be important, therefore we should be doing all of these things.
Yeah.
The job simply must be done, and then it is made visible why product marketing is important if it's done in all of these ways. If you are showing up to product stand-ups or whatever the product planning meetings and you're representing the market and sales reality as product teams make their decisions, it 100% influences how they make a decision.
Yeah.
Oh, well, we have 5 things that we could have done, or 25 things these days with the way people can code. There are 25 things that were equally possible this week. Let's do the one that's gonna have market impact, because why not?
Yeah.
You helped them make a decision that was market forward instead of what was achievable inside of product. So that's the show up. With that. And then they don't wanna make decisions without you. Go like, "Well, why wouldn't we do things that have market impact?" So show
Yeah.
up, and
Yeah.
that's
It-
what creates that. On the strategy front, if you articulate upfront, here's why we are doing this, here's when we're doing it and why we're doing it, and then you can correlate a result with we had this intention, and then here's what resulted from that. Or it might be a launch event, or you attended an event, or you did something that was strategically important to achieve a particular goal. And then the company can say, oh, look, I see now why we did that, and we achieved something. And it wasn't just a marketing activity that we did. It achieved something specific that's advancing our goals. That's exciting. And then people are like, let's do more of that. Of course, the positioning, everybody sees that. And then the evangelist, when really mature company, they knew it was really critically important for them to advance inside of recommendations for analysts. They spent a ton of time, and you can see that result. It's critically important. So when the people see the results and the importance of that result, then they will recognize and elevate product marketing.
You need to earn your stars.
Yes. Yeah, well, you want the organization to enable it.
Yeah.
But what I've seen is even if there's the will, if people don't step up and do it, it doesn't matter. Like it's unfortunate. If you're given the tools, then people are like, okay, but I guess that's really true for anything. Like you have the opportunity to do as much as you can in the role when it's given to you, and then you just have to do it.
Yeah, I guess, and like just to finish it off, function wise, also if there's a new feature coming out and you're the one that trains the sales team in the exact right way of pitching this new feature, they will love and respect you as well because they make more money because you're the one who teaches them how to position these things.
Exactly. Exactly.
Martina, you haven't directly said it right now, but I can hear it from everything you're saying. There's like the core of like the foundation of this product marketing as you have to speak with customers. It seems like it kind of feeds all your other work that you have like a constant influx of meetings with customers. But how do you think about this term, like like when you say the market, do you mean is it like vendor research or is it the speaking exactly with the customers? And I assume speaking with customers is probably very high up on that list.
I mean, speaking with customers or understanding customers' reality is thing one by a long shot, by the most extreme. And I would say even more so now in the current world than like when I started my career. Because way back when software cycles used to be slower, you could get third party influence to create disproportional market results. And in the current environment where it's easy to sub out vendors, there are so many different choices, and a new competitor can spring up tomorrow that's doing almost exactly the same thing in a more technology advanced way. And people are like, oh, that's the bright new shiny object. It's you do have to be laser focused on the value you're providing customers and that it is just superior and you have an opinionated point of view about why. I think that's another part of the challenge of this moment that's very squarely in product marketing. You'll have a problem. There isn't only one way to solve it. There are probably two, three, four different ways of solving that problem, and they're all legitimate. None of them are totally wrong. Someone's just going to make a decision on a point of view that they believe more. I believe this is the better way for our organization to solve this problem. And here's why. And influencing a market, and this is why you have to understand customer mindset. That's why it's number one, is I can't just blast out this is the superior way. I have to put it in a context that is meaningful for a customer to say, yeah, I can see why this would be better for me. That's how everybody's oriented. And so that's why we have to have the customer lens first and foremost.
That's so great, Martina. How would you kind of stack the, let's call them then research methodologies? You could send a survey and ask what's on top of your mind, just one to many kind of style. You could have like 30 minutes online. Should you fly to them? Should you use some kind of third party vendor survey, like, sorry, customer serving service? Or like what, like if you had to kind of like go into the specific activities you do to achieve this superior customer knowledge, what are the kind of the first ones on your list?
Well, I would say the intersection of accessibility and achievability is listening to sales calls because that's the reality that your market is facing and someone that's already leaned in. So that I'd say is number one. But number two is really I'd say anywhere you can experience the customer in their reality in some version of their on-site. So it might be if you're in the B2B marketing, it's like, well, what's a conference that everybody's going to where you can talk to a lot of people, hear what the buzz is, go in and hear what questions are being asked, see what people seem to be interested in, what are the sessions that aren't, and then just ask questions. So what are you guys using? What are the tools that you are finding interesting? Going to meetups and or communities where those types of conversations are happening, wherever they are. I think that I'd say is number two, just because you get density and concentration in a short amount of time. And I'd say the gold standard, but what takes much more effort to achieve is if you're actually able to observe customers on site in their world, watching how they work. And this is a little bit more in the intersection of both product and product management and product marketing. But if you watch and observe someone in using your tool in the context of your day, you realize, oh man, it's like they might go here twice a week, or they're in it every day, but then look at all the other stuff they spend the majority of their time. How do we make sure that the time they do spend in our product feels like it's giving them the most value, or that they want to turn to our product? The marketer's job is to make sure that I'm thinking I should go there. The product team's job is to make sure once they're there that they stay or that they use it. So, those would be my top 3.
Really nice, Martina. So you're talking about this like hyper competitive markets nowadays, somewhat driven by AI and technology costs going down. I was just thinking, kind of, what's your thinking in general around competition, and how much should product marketers be studying the competition, or like you can't be truly leading if you're following others? And how do we deal with this hyper competition today? And like, what's the attention we need to pay to our direct competitors?
So there's your direct competition, and then there's your indirect competition, which is the attention competition and overlapping or adjacent spaces that where a lot more oxygen might be sucked up than your direct competitor category competition. So I would say the competitive environment's critically important. It's massively going to impact you at the sales level, because someone's going to ask ChatGPT or Gemini saying like, I'm looking at Datafold. Who else should I be looking at? Or how do they compare and contrast? And that's sort of upfront. And then they're like, okay, well, then let me reach out to these 2 or 3 others. I want to compare and contrast them. It's become so easy to do the top line comparison that you do have to pay attention. You have to pay attention to how you're being positioned by the things that are summarizing you. And then make sure that, like, because it's going to have an opinion. If you're this, then this one's the better one. And if you're that, then this is the better one. And if you're that, then this is the better one. So you want your opinionated version of the world to be accurately represented in how you show up. So the competition matters a lot, because the world is this. It's easily. It's now much easier. More. It's now easier than it ever was to compare and contrast. So we have to pay attention to how we're being compared and what we're being compared to.
That's very interesting. And I think you see many of these surveys that are saying kind of more and more of the conversation or the sales journey moves, or the AE conversations move very later and later and later into the funnel.
Yeah.
Right? That's about kind of opinions are almost done and dusted by the time that they book a demo.
Yeah.
And what does that mean for us in as product marketers or B2B marketers, that people do their own research nowadays, or like they only come to vendors at the very last minute because behavior is elsewhere?
Yeah. Well, this is we started the conversation talking about website. Well, your website winds up being a really critically important your website, and then all the other assets that you have control over that are influencing how you're showing up. I'll just say this is your digital front door. Has to be really strong. That was always the case, but it's now just as important, and other things are now more important. So we know Reddit and G2 and YouTube all influence this very much, because it can consume qualitative content, not just kind of the words on the page. But we also want to understand that we live in this comparative world. And so when people say, oh, have things in fact like things, that's how someone's thinking about it. Does it do this? Does it do that? How's it compared to this? How's it compared to that? And rather than having them have to surmise this, make it easy and very consumable for people and machines.
Hmm. If you used to have a very big BDR department calling out a cold, maybe you need to put those resources into like, SEO work or AEO work nowadays, to make sure you actually show up in the conversations once the kind of opinions about the market is created.
Yeah. Well, G2 does this. I don't know if it's a biannual survey, but the most recent survey that they did is showed that in April of last year, around 30 something percent of people were starting their searches in an answer engine of some kind. And by August, that was up to 50%. And I'd say there are very few things I have ever seen in my 30 plus years where there's been that big a behavioral change that's happened that quickly. Like in 4 months, that 20 percentage points change, that's enormous. And we know that that's only gonna increase. And so how do we as marketers, how do we prepare for that world?
It's it's crazy. And I think one of the outcomes is that is also that like PR is suddenly back on the B2B menu.
Yes, 'cause it
Once
exactly.
here,
Yeah.
now you want to have a lot of stories out where your
Press releases for every feature. Yeah, uh-huh. Yep.
you've also been thinking about that.
Well, it's people talk about it. I don't and it's hard to say yet whether it or not how effective all of it is. It is I'd say it has amplified what always was best practice in the past. It's amplified its importance for different reasons now. And yeah, to your point about, PR being important in a new way.
Yeah, for this year, put a PR agency in the budget for that reason that there's topics and that we need to be associated with these topics. So we need to go out and do some.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and this is the influencer, the evangelist part, which is, are you showing up on the lists? And it's just the blocking and tackling that we have to make sure, it's buttoned up.
Martina, because you wrote this fantastic book, Loft, and you touched about those four pillars of product marketing, I just wanted to ask you, is there one or two, 3 points from the book that like today's headline is that what great product marketing looks like in 26? Are there any kind of things in the book that deserves a call out that I haven't asked you about yet?
Well, I'd say one of the questions that I get asked the most, you started to talk about, but we didn't dive into deeply, which is how do you organize and structure product marketing for success? And this is one where I'd say there isn't a formulaic approach. One thing that you and I were talking about was how Europe is really in a different state because there aren't as many people who have done product marketing. So you're typically pulling talent from other arenas, from sales, from marketing, from product, and who's the right person to put in that role and how do we make them successful? And I would say if I had to pick from one of those archetypes, I would right now, it's the more curious person who is totally willing to just jump in and use the tools. It's less the experience that they bring and more the mindset that they bring. And this has been a shift, I would say, in the last couple of years, because the tool set is now such that anyone that has the will and the curiosity can be successful with it much more quickly. And it's just, are they willing to lean in and learn and just dive right in? And then to make them successful at the sort of executive level, you have to have the remit for what you're expecting of the role be clear. So if it's a fairly new organization and it's small, like there's only 3 people and the rest of your organization's 150 people, it's going to be really hard for them to stick out as a function. But if they are a function attached to a particular product or product launch or new initiative where their effort is much more visible, that's a much stronger start for product marketing or much stronger way to make their impact visible. Then everyone says, oh, wow, look what happened to that new thing that we did. And it was so much stronger than when we just did launches in a traditional way. So let's do more of that. And that's how you build out the power of the organization. Now, of course, if you're a much more established company that has many more product marketers, this is a very, very different world. And I won't dive into that unless you think I can, but it's very, very different when you're a mature organization and you have many other political
Yeah.
and organizational dynamics that you have to take into account.
Yeah. Actually, so while you were talking about right now, I was thinking about how do you think about the like ramp time for product marketers that start at a new company? Because you really need to become the that person that knows the most about your customers, but also knows like top tier about your product, and you also know the life of the sales team. So, what's a fair ramp time if you start as a product marketer in a company? And
Well, I think a fair ramp time for anyone is like 90 days. That's kind of like, yeah, that's the entree. Like humans are still humans, and that's what we give them as grace. That being said, with AI as tools, the amount of learning that you can do on the product and market front with just a little bit of time is unbelievable. And I know for myself, when I work with Costanoa portfolio companies, we've hyper technical, extremely different companies. So one day I'm working with a defense company that's basically the AccuWeather of the invisible spectrum. So, and then the next day I'm working with a cybersecurity company, and I have to have enough knowledge about both to be helpful.
Yeah.
And the only way that I can get myself up to speed to have, thoughtful comments is I have to ingest all of that product knowledge through LLMs, and that's what I do. I basically have, like, ingest, like, 60 pages of documentation, "Explain this to me. How about this?" And I just all the questions that I normally would have to do with humans and do the product, I can proxy a lot of that hyper technical stuff with product material and documentation.
Mm.
And so being able to understand more of the technical and product specifics, I think now you can get up to speed much more quickly than you ever could.
That's very interesting, Martina. Maybe you can just reveal some of kind of your favorite product marketing tool stack for people to go check out themselves afterwards.
I mean, my favorite product marketing tool stack is, and model of choice, but I use Claude and I use Claude projects. And I will, for any company that I'm doing product marketing work with, I basically, set up the foundation. Like what are the principles that I want it to apply, the persona, the products that I basically want it to apply to. And then I just use it as a thought partner for a lot of the work that I do. Any of the work that I do, I use it as a thought partner. And I'd say that to me is the foundation for any product marketer. And then beyond that, this is not an AI tool stack, but again, just being
Yeah.
able to ingest and process customer calls, I think that's hyper valuable any way that you do that. And there's the combination of the summary, but then there's also the specifics of, listen to it. If it's at 1.5 speed, but you want to see it, listen to it, I think there's explicit value in that. So those would be my top two go-tos.
Okay, fantastic. Thank you so much for everything so far, Martina. I just want to like end with kind of asking you if there's like one thing about product marketing that you really think people should take with them today. What would kind of like be the crystallizing kind of messaging to share?
I think product marketing is having a moment that it has never had because of the proliferation of product that we have and because of the tools we have at our disposal. And you and I talked about this earlier. The bar that separates good from great now has just been raised because there's no mediocre. The mediocre is all better than the mediocre of the past. So this is just true everywhere. The bar has just been raised. So for all product, everyone practicing product marketing, and that's not just people that are carrying the title of product marketer. Just know that your job is to connect and make people curious. You don't need to do the sale, but you need to give people the right level of information for where they are when curiosity strikes so that they want to engage with you as a company and choose you as a company.
What a wonderful last pitch for product marketing. Thank you so much, Martina. If people, me, want to follow more of the knowledge you gain or the insights you gain, what's the best place to kind of follow your work?
It's gonna be on LinkedIn. I will try to all the things that I'm learning and doing in AI, I'm trying to do a better job of putting what my learnings out there so that I can help others advance in their practice of product marketing. Because I do think more and more if you have a company of 12 people that are getting to, tens of millions in revenue, they might not be hiring a product marketer and they still need to do the work. So how do we help everybody do this important work?
Cool. And is it still possible to like professionally work with you in some capability?
Well, I do twice a year. I teach SVPG product marketing workshops that are open to the public. So anyone is welcome to attend those. And we do dive in and actually do work and use the tools and tune using the models. And we lean into the reality that we are in, which is AI is there. And part of what we are training our minds to do is where do we see white space outside of what it recommends? Or if this is what it's saying is content suggestions, which is now obvious, how do I find something that is less obvious and will get attention because it wasn't what the model would have predicted?
Wonderful. Thank you so much for your time, Martina. I really enjoyed this conversation.
Oh,
And
thank you for having me.
We hope you like listening to us. Subscribe to our podcast and the ones that we have been guests on.
And if you have any feedback for us, just do let us know. And should there be a guest that you think we should be talking to, then pitch us.
We're looking forward to seeing you.